Welcome to this next episode on Raw and Real conversations about deep topics that often haven't been discussed, at least not in the way that I think many of us would like to discuss these topics, right? And um, and going deeper into some of those topics here. Um, in a raw and real and authentic way. I'm not going to hold back, but I'm going to find a space of loving compassion because I think that's the key. And I want to focus on that a little bit more in this third podcast episode here, where we bring in a little bit, where we name what's real, but we also bring in some love so that it can digest within our systems, because ultimately what you digest within yourself is what you reflect outward to society. And the best thing that you can do is be the best version of yourself, although I hate that terminology. How can I say that better? Well, the best thing that you can do is to hold the greatest amount of love for everything that's going on for yourself and shine that out towards others so that they can do the same. That's better. So today I promised I would talk about free will, and we will. So yeah, this is a very deep and interesting topic, and I'll get right to it. I think, I don't know if we all agree, but let's just say, for the sake of argument and this podcast, that the basis of life is free will. We all have choice. Whether you believe in free will is maybe a big topic, but let's say choice. The basis of life is choice. We'll have choices, right? Even, and I'm going to contradict myself later here, but even when we don't think we have choices because any situation we're in, there's always a choice still to do something or not to do something, or to move or to not move, or to there's always room for some kind of choice, right? So let's call that free will. But it goes deeper than that. But what if your will that people say that you have is not free? So you have free will, but what if that will is not free? That's what I want to talk about here. And I came to that topic through my own experiences that I'm going to share here. Because if you're like me and you've done a lot of inner work, or you're on the way to do a lot of inner work, many spiritual teachers will tell you that there's free will, and indeed there is, and that is a very indestructible principle of our spirit realm that we live in on this physical planet, where free will is there's always a choice, and you cannot be forced by external forces or authorities to do something against your free will. But there's a lot of nuances and caveats to that. And to dive right in, if you've experienced life as I have, where, and we all have this to a certain degree, but in my case, my life was a buildup of a lot of, there were a lot of good things. Let's put that up as well. I grew up in Holland, which is a very stable country, very wealthy. So, there was a lot of material support. There was a lot of support on my path of growing up here. But at the same time, I experienced a lot of psychic and emotional abuse, mainly in the external world, for my sensitivities, and partly my being different and highly sensitive nature. And that scarred me very deeply. And what I learned from those experiences, I think, when I reflect back to my early childhood and teenage years, is I learned to absorb and soak in and internalize all of that pain. And I did it as well from a higher level, probably, to learn in this lifetime, because I didn't understand. Part of my nature is that I was very different than others. And so I didn't understand what was going on very well. And so, because I was so sensitive, I didn't really fit in. And so I automatically absorbed a lot of the pain from being different and being judged and rejected and bullied in those atmospheres. And then I absorbed that in like a sponge. But it kind of, as I grew the last 10, 15 years of my life through a lot of intense spiritual healing to try and kind of remove all that crap from the past, I learned, if anything, that sponge, you can wring it out by doing a lot of healing work. And then you think you've cleared yourself from all the stuff that you've absorbed. But if the water that the sponge absorbed was moldy and the sponge turned moldy, you can wring it out all you want. But the mold has infected the sponge, and the sponge itself has become mixed, become enmeshed with that frequency, with that horrible, disgusting frequency of whatever that mold is, that dirt. And so it's very hard to remove the stains and the bacteria and the stuff that gets into the deeper crevices of that sponge. And so that's kind of what my life felt like, I guess, from that perspective. And when you're in that type of position, right, and maybe some of you resonate with how deep that goes, what do you do, right? What do you do? Well, you look for external support. But I looked for it only when I became ill first, which was in my 20s, mid-20s, 25. And I became ill with what I at least thought. I don't even know if it's true, because there's a lot of controversies around that I've learned over the years, so I don't take anything for truth anymore these days. But let's just call it chronic Lyme disease. A lot of and a very systemic inflammatory illness that affected a lot of my organs and my body tissues and everything, and my central nervous system, my immune system, everything, my moods, everything went downhill. I became highly sensitive to environments, etc., etc. And so that again was a point for me where I learned, up until that point, things were intact for me, even though there was trauma. I was intact. But after that point, the wounding showed up and took over for reasons that I'm not going to go into here. But what happened was it derails your sense of self-worth, the way that, of course, I've experienced that in my childhood as well. A lot of adversity, a lot of challenge, a lot of extreme difficulty, to the point where challenge is good. People always say that. But when challenge gets forced on you to the point of collapse, which through abuse happened many times for me, including physical, then it, again, that sponge example, it does something. It scars you in a way that you can't really easily get rid of. And it diminishes the trust in yourself. It breaks you down psychically. And so when I became ill, physically ill, and emotionally and mentally probably as well, it was a call to action to move through these layers, which I started doing. But the problem was, at the same time, that when you're in that type of situation, what do you do? Like I said, well, you look for external support. But I looked for it. I looked for external support in more of because I saw that the Western medicine wasn't doing me any favors in healing, overcoming this complexity and my sensitivities and everything. Total ignorance, no recognition. I can talk about that another time as well. But at the same time, I put all my faith in the healers that I started finding over time when I started adjusting to a healthy, open-minded, more spiritual lifestyle that would become a reflection of my potential that I was growing into as I was healing. and I wanted to physically heal. That was my main goal. But what happens when you do that, and for years you put yourself second, and you put the external, everything that you absorb, again, it's the absorbing thing again, right? Absorbing information, absorbing perspectives, absorbing healing frequencies, absorbing energies and states of being and examples and from other people, etc., doing a lot of inner healing work from the outside in, then you basically dismiss your own power. You basically say to yourself, well, I'm not worth very much because I can't seem to get out of this situation because that was what the illness forced me to. So I must need support in order to get there. So these people that have made, and I found the people that have made great promises of great results, and yet they were never able to bring me those results, which fed a cycle of disappointment that disempowered me further. So this is the key here that I'm trying to say, is that disempowerment made it such that over the years, I fell into such a void space, a gap, that anything I actually did, and here comes the free will element, didn't really work. In fact, it started working against me more and more simply because I wasn't really doing them from an empowered place of free will choice, from an inner state of truth and alignment with believing in myself of who I was. So it doesn't work out when you're in a state where you're very pure as a being, you're very aligned to a higher level of perspective, you're very sensitive and aware and intelligent, and you know that you can't bullshit yourself, and yet you completely dismiss yourself, and then you hope things will turn out well. It doesn't work very well. But that was all I thought I had at the time. And so this is the key here. Back to the first sentence I shared, the basis of life is free will, but what if your will is not free? Then it doesn't help you to make choices. People then often tell you, and a lot of healers have done that, and teachers, and then they say, well, you always have choices, and choose what you want and manifest what you want and all that. And it's all bullshit, because it doesn't work. It only works when you've built up an identity of yourself where you know that you are able to achieve certain things, and you've built up a certain level of confidence and self-worth that you can actually achieve those things. Then you can make choices. But if your choices come from an empty vacuum, which is partly because all the work I've done cleared out all the junk from that sponge, right? And then you become deeply empty, and you leave that space open because you're afraid of it, because you don't know who you are. Then the vacuum stays open, and you believe that you'll get external support, which reinforces that internally you can't master that void space, and that vacuum stays open. Then you're not going to be very empowered to be able to move forward, which is the state I was in. And eventually it catches up to you, and you need to go through that, which is the phase I'm in now. And it's very painful even to talk about, because it makes me question everything, whether my worth is in anything I do all day long, because I can't feel it, because there's that emptiness inside, which is the transitional space that I'll be talking about sometimes. And this is what I'm referring to, that transitional space, going through a tunnel from my old self to my new self. But if that tunnel is miles and miles and miles and miles long, and you never get through it, you're constantly in transition space because you are never able to complete going through it. Then you're constantly stuck, and over time you build up an identity based on being in that tunnel, and you don't know what to do, and you're kind of really confined, claustrophobic, maybe even. That's how I felt in life. And it all feels very dark, like it does in a tunnel. You're not seeing the light, and there's not the time, the day, and the beauty and the surroundings that you would like to be in. Your inner landscape is very limited, and it becomes a reflection of the outer landscape, which I've experienced very deeply as well. And that's painful. And then free will isn't really helpful. You can imagine, right? Free will in that space is not really helpful, because to say that you have a choice means actually that I've been disempowered from being able to make a choice. Because And I know that's an illusion, of course, right? But the illusion has become so strong and so real that you need incredible force and trust in yourself, basically, and self-worth to build up a momentum to be able to break that illusion. And that's exactly what I did all the external work for, but it never got me there. It got me cleaned up, but it didn't get me there, because of course, if it did get me there, I would still be disempowered, because the goal always is to go within and do it from yourself. And that was something that was too painful for me to go to, despite doing all the work to get there and wanting it in a way, but at the same time not wanting it, right? So that's the piece that I really wanted to share in this podcast, first of all. And what happens second is then when you actually do take steps, which, for example, I've been doing the last few years more and more, to show up in life with what you have to offer. Not only do you not know what you have to offer, but you also feel like you're not really making a choice. Because even when you make a choice, like I was saying, right, you get to that state, and maybe some of you are in that. I don't know if you will have experienced it as deeply as what I'm describing here, but many of you will have it in a different way. And that's also why I'm sharing it, because this is a very common theme that I see with more people around me, is when you think you're making a choice, it's still not a fully embodied, feeling level aligned choice of your truth of who you are, and from that place making the choice, which means you're still not really making a choice. You're trying something out. It's different than, do you see what I'm saying? So, and what happens then is life finds its way into your system, and the darkness does too, which we talked about earlier. It's like the saying, and I wrote it down somewhere because I can't remember it. Here, darkness controls an individual to the point that its bidding is done against his free will. And what that means is, and it's very true, free will must always be respected. But there are forces that love also on a humanity level. That's why this is all collective as well. This is not just personal. This is a collective process that many people don't see that's going on in the world. But there's forces of darkness, let's call that. This, we talked about that earlier. The intent matters a lot, right? It's the intent from which we all yield power, but the intent from which place we do it matters. And that's the key. And so the negative influences through channels of darkness in life that have not the purest intent at heart, let's say, right, control people where, let me say this correctly, free will isn't like I was saying, where you are not standing in the power of your own free will, not just having it, but standing in the power of it. That gets used against you as well by forces that come into your space that you leave open because you're not embodied within yourself. It's like living like a basement. What grows there? Well, creatures and rodents and mold and stuff. Why does it grow in a basement? Because you're not living there. The spaces in which you live and inhabit, right, they don't seem to do that. Why? Because you're inhabiting the space, so it doesn't have a chance to take over. That's how life works. Nature abhors a vacuum. Vacuums don't exist in nature. You can't hold open a vacuum. So things get filled in. So that's what the forces of darkness do as well. When you don't stand in your light with your empowered being so that you can make those choices from that aligned space, then forces take over, and they even use that against you. So they manipulate you through your free will to do things that you don't want because you're not doing the things that you do. Does that make sense? And so that's a very difficult concept that we'll talk about more. But nevertheless, this is important. And so let's come back to what I said at the beginning of the call here, of the podcast here, where I said let's focus on providing some love for this space, not just for me, but mainly also for you as you're listening. Right? And we don't have to do anything for that. It's just take a moment to breathe. Because that's a lot. That's a lot to process already. And by no means is it everything, but it's a lot. And when we can't love that space, I mean, not love it as in we love that it's here, but I mean, when we can't hold a space of self-love for ourselves going through this is one of the transitions that humanity, at least a large segment of it, is going through at some level. Well, they need love to be able to make it to the other side of that transition, because that is the goal. I imagine that's the goal. That's what I feel is the goal for me. So it must be that way also for others, because ultimately you start realizing what else is there except love. It really is cliche, but it is true, because the rest is all meaningless if you can't feel a connectedness from a space of your open heart with love for who you are. And that imbues your life with the energy and the alignment with the goodness that you want, in order to make choices that align you with your free will, that give you the power to achieve what you'd like to do, whatever that may be. You know? So when I felt often, and I still feel that way, so it's not something that's, oh, it's cleared up and it's cleaned up and it's healed and it's gone. Maybe it will at some point, but up until now it hasn't been, despite promises of healers getting me there. And I'll repeat that often as well, because there's a lot of frustration in me around that, and we'll talk about that more. Because I think people do need to hear that. Because there's so much deceit and manipulation in the world of this topic of free will, where free will gets abused because people don't realize that they have true power within themselves, or they don't know how to find it. But when I was in that space, or when I am in that space, it's hard to do anything when it doesn't really feel like it's a choice, because I don't really feel aligned. But if nothing feels aligned, because people then say, well, look what you feel aligned, search for what you feel aligned for and then go do that. But if you've been searching or looking for years and you've never found anything because you can't feel it, then it's one of those useless sort. It means meant well, but it's not really helpful. And often people don't understand the space either that you're in when you're in this type of space. So they don't know how to help you either, because they don't have it the way that you have it. And it's hard to show what's going on. Any of you may be feeling that in your life as well. Difficulty revealing or communicating how you feel. So you can't really grasp maybe even what it is. Well, this may be part of that piece of the puzzle. But what happens is you do something anyway, right? Or in my case, I tried to do stuff, but if I speak about me, I knew that it didn't feel good. And so if deep within, I know that I don't feel good about myself because of that low self-worth, because of not having achieved things in my life, because of feeling powerless to change anything, because of being not connected to myself. So the free will aspect didn't help me at all. Then I know that it's not going to turn out well, whatever I do. And then that increased the distrust in myself, and it opened up a wider gap, which is that void space that I had to transition through. But then that distrust means ultimately I didn't make choices. I stepped out of making choices, which is a choice. It's a choice to not make choices anymore. Do you see? So you're still making a choice when you do that. But what happens is energetically, you have to imagine this here. When you don't make a choice, you become somewhat transparent. You're almost not here, because your choices define your will to live. Because I'm not talking about not choosing to go to the supermarket or the grocery store and pick up some product. I'm talking about not choosing to do anything with my life. And then that kind of level of not making a choice, while you grow in your level of consciousness and awareness and clarity of mind, and you sort of go to these, how do I say that? You go to higher states of awareness, let's call it that. It's rather neutral. Your responsibility and the accountability of what you can oversee at a greater level, at some level, becomes bigger, because you can't unsee all of the growth that you're making. But at the same time, if you don't use that in any way to make a choice to move forward, you use all that infinite power that you have, or that I had, and you focus it on not making a choice, you're opening yourself up to a great level of, you can become like Casper the Ghost. You float. You don't densify your physical form, and you don't solidify on Earth in the material plane very well, because you're not really wanting to be here, because you're choosing not really to live. You see what I'm saying? And that goes deep into these patterns that we can go into, but I'm not going to do that right now. But for now, that's what's going on, or that's what went on for me. And that's really not a good thing, because then you have to really hold your space, because then everything comes into you. Just like when you're literally a ghost, you just float through, everything floats through, but it you sort of, in the patterns that you still have, the absorbing power of that sponge, right? You still absorb everything you don't want. That still stays. So you're constantly fighting off everything you don't want, but that sort of, so you become super aware, but also hyper vigilant, and also very non-existent and transparent in your life. And so where's your self-worth, your definition, your goodness? Well, it can't really be there. It can't hold on to that transparent state of being. It's very difficult to explain this to people and how it really works at a deeper level. But then the answer is to make choices, but to really do that means overcoming a lot at that point, psychically, physically, emotionally, mentally. You have to be prepared to really work against everything that doesn't want to move or change, and everything that's stored in your system from holding on in that transparent mode has to come out, because it's not who you really are. And it's basically like I was saying, an empty house. The bums move in, right? They take over the space. You want your house back, but well, they don't want to leave, right? They're quite comfortable there. It's what happens with the darkness as well, and with all those forces of control that take over. Once you give them the space, they don't want to give it back, because they need that as a fuel source to survive. And so it really does work that way. And so I've had a lot of struggle with these themes of light and dark. And to some of you, that may seem a bit exaggerated, or a bit over embellished, or a bit dramatic, or a bit disbelief, that you don't really see that that's really what it is. But it is. It really is. And for some of you, this may make perfect sense. But whatever it is, I'm just here to bring this discussion so that we can build connections between what's really happening through the lens of what I'm experiencing, so that you can also start to grow in your clarity, because this is one of the big keys, right? Becoming very clear about what's happening is the first step to empowerment and taking your power back. Because if you're not even clear, then you lose yourself in the soup. And that's exactly the confusion weakens your ability to hold your space and to strengthen in order to begin to overcome this type of dynamic in your life. And that's what I had very much. To the point, actually, where emotionally, energetically, I felt like I couldn't take care of anything anymore. And that was part of the regression to my early childhood that I needed to rewrite and re-experience in a more positive way on my path of strengthening and clarifying who I was. So it's all, in a way, you could say it's all perfect and intelligent, but at the same time, really messed up. And you lose total trust in yourself in that space. And it just feels like you're an infant, which is what I felt like. I felt like an infant, totally dependent, and also on the external, which deeply hurt me through disappointment and reinforced the cycle of disempowerment. And it created disillusionment of the path itself. But hey, we're here now. These are the steps to move through it, because if you're going through what I'm going through at some level, which is probably likely also if you're listening to this, then you have to go through it. You have no other choice. So take what you can get in order to learn what's going on. And that's a part of taking your power back, which is going to clarify who you are and what you want more, because the key is to get very close and very connected and intimate and nurturing with yourself from a space of love and compassion in order to begin to not let in all the things that you don't want, and to not to do things that are going to lead you off your path, but to stay very close and to scale things down, including expectations, including question beliefs, and just stay very present. Do a lot of meditation. Take care of your body. Eat very healthy. Take walks. Do things on a daily basis as much as you can to make sure that you, in this large collective and personal transition space that in a way everybody is in, because the whole world's going through a tunnel and they don't know where they're going to end up, right? It's the same process. It's just maybe not quite as in depth and as I'm describing it on a personal level, but it's a track that we're all on, and you'll get through it. At least that's the hope. I can't promise anything. I don't know if I'll get through it, but we have to hope, right? Do what we can within the power that we have, which is all paradoxically in the present moment. And it doesn't lie out there, not with other people, but also not in the future. It lies right here. But again, if we've been so deeply disempowered, we don't feel that the power lies here. And that's the key. That's what you need to stay very strongly connected with, wanting to experience more of that. So don't let your inner wounding drive your life. But easier said than done. Much easier said than done, I have to admit. And one thing that I wanted to add to this before we begin to come to a close. I said earlier that clarity is important. I think it's one of the greatest underestimated gifts that we can cultivate, is becoming very clear with seeing, thinking, articulating and communicating, etc., etc. Very, very useful and very important. But some people interpret that to mean that they need to have the answers before they can move forward. But you don't need to have clarity. Is not about knowing the answer to things, right? So clarity does not mean you know what's going on. It helps, but or knowing what will happen. It's not knowing what's going on. It's also not knowing what will happen, because nobody knows. And anybody that tells you that they do, they're lying, because they can't possibly know what will happen, because the future isn't set in stone. It changes with every decision that you make. Even if you feel like you're not really making decisions, there are still choices that you're making that influence the potentials of how life will unfold. And others in relation to you also make choices that deviate in all kinds of directions. So life constantly unfolds dynamically, and nothing is set in stone, so nobody can even predict exactly how things will go. Timelines keep changing, as it were, right? So having clarity is not about knowing the answer, or not about knowing what will happen, but it's about being clear about where you are right now and your intent in this moment. I'll take that one in, because that is very important to realize, because that is part of the disempowerment as well in that space. Is you think you need to get to a place to know what it is, but rather the cliche thing is it's already here, but you do need to cultivate a more clear and refined and sharp understanding of what that is, so that you can become clear in this moment. And that's a path to that space. And I hope my podcast here on Raw and Real helps you get and achieve a little bit more of that. So thank you so much for listening and also taking this in. I hope this brings you a lot of goodness. Don't forget, there's also another podcast that I've started a while back called Casual Conversations on Awakening. It's on my channel. You can find it on YouTube, and you can find it on my Facebook. And it also aims to help to inform you, but it has more also sometimes meditations that I bring through, where I infuse those meditations with frequencies from who I am, from what I bring through. Now that's another explanation that I will give you in another call, but for now, I hope you have a good evening. Enjoy this and take it easy if you're in this space. It's a longer process. Keep at it. Find ways in which you can change many things in your environment. Small changes daily is a very good practice. Small changes, very small changes, but they add up over time, just like saving. Small amounts over time generate big amounts. That's my preference. That works. And until next time, bye-bye.